It's a pleasure to be here and talk about this project, and I should start by pointing out that this is really going to be kind of a flyover view of the efforts of a lot of people. So there's a lot of names up on the screen, and this is an area that we've been working in initially with respect to pelvic organ prolapse, but have expanded that to a lot of different segments of the industry, and our team has consistently expanded as we've continued to work in those areas. It involves collaborators at Purdue and K-State and Iowa State University, and much of the funding has been through the Pork Checkoff in cooperation with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. So to get started, about 5 years ago, we started seeing this increase in pelvic organ prolapse in the sow herd across the industry. You could Google sow mortality, and there's a lot of people, very frustrated people, trying to identify and understand the underlying causes associated with pelvic organ prolapse. Lots of discussions happening at the World Pork Expo and other venues. And then eventually, Chris Hostetler decided to take a lead and invested, and the Animal Science Committee invested some money into trying to understand areas that we should begin to look at to better understand the causative reasons behind pelvic organ prolapse in sows. And so that RFP was released in 2017, and we've kind of been working in that area since then. And so we've really been adopting this problem-solving cycle with this project, with really initially to monitor and benchmark the occurrence of pelvic organ prolapse, and now we're expanding that into mortality in general. But then also then to help us identify areas that we can investigate to tease out some of the putative causes, with the hope of expanding that effort into testing hypothesis-driven or hypotheses to validate those causes, and then develop mitigation strategies and disseminate and implement those into the industry. So that initial pelvic organ prolapse project that we conducted was really focused on establishing a network of industry partners, working with sow farm managers and a lot of different sow farms across the country. Initially, we wanted to work with about 60 to 70 sow farms, and we ended up working with a little over 100 sow farms across the U.S. And the purpose of that was not to test a specific hypothesis with respect to what causes pelvic organ prolapse, but rather to identify areas that we can pursue other avenues of investigation. So to kind of summarize that effort, we had 104 sow farms across 15 states in the U.S. We collected mortality data on those sow farms for the duration of a year. Initially, the project was set up to be a 9-month project, but as we validated really early on in the project that POP is occurring, has some annual or seasonal variations, we thought it was important to benchmark for the entire year. We had 18 farms that were part of larger production systems, and also 19 farms that were from independent producers. And those sow farms range from 600 sows to 10,600 sows from an inventory. So about 385,000 sows worth of production. We also went out onto those farms, onto 62 of those farms, and did site visits where we collected all kinds of data on herd factors, facility factors, management factors, animal-based measures. And I won't go into all the details because I think I did that last year here and talked a lot about the specifics of what we collected at each of those farms. So I'm going to just kind of jump to where we wanted to continue moving to with respect to that study. And so, but this kind of summarizes the pelvic organ prolapse issue in general, and that these are all the 104 farms that were involved in the study. This is their annualized non-POP mortality represented by the red, and the POP mortality represented by the yellow portion of the bars. And you can kind of see over here on average, if this is representative of the entire U.S. industry, there's about a 13% annualized mortality, of which about 2.7% of that is attributed to pelvic organ prolapse. So about 21% of all sows that were dying due to pelvic organ prolapse during this year of this data collection. And so the other component of that is that we also showed that a little over 30% were dying due to what the sow farm managers thought were related to lameness issues. And that's important because that helped influence what we are continuing to work on with our current funding. So there it is, about 29% with the lameness, 15, 4, and 2% were vaginal, rectal, or both contributing to that 21% of the pelvic organ prolapse mortality. But then there's still 39% are dying due to reasons that were not obvious to the sow farm managers. So, like I said, we collected hundreds of pieces of information for every sow farm, different management approaches, and really the goal of that was to identify areas that people maybe thought were associated with pelvic organ prolapse, like tail length, the size of the sow farm, induction protocols, particle size in the feed, and those are things that we evaluated and could not find any association with the pelvic organ prolapse rate for those farms. Other things that were kind of just still that we thought about and don't really have enough information to make conclusive statements on were the region, sow housing strategies, use of laxatives, mycotoxins, health status, genetics, nutrition. Those are all different things that may or may not influence pelvic organ prolapse, but by the design of the study, we're not able to tease that out completely. But one of the things that are here in green are things that we think were important findings in the study, and one of which was water quality. And one of the ways that we looked at that was sow farms that use a water treatment system, right, either chlorine-based or peroxide-based. Those farms had significantly fewer prolapses on an annualized basis compared to the farms that were not using, that were also using well water but not using a water treatment system. Body condition score of the sows. So we looked at management, feed management of the sows and their body condition going into farrowing. The thinner sows had a higher probability of prolapsing than sows that were ideal weight or overweight. We thought that would be different. We thought overweight sows were more likely to prolapse. Was not the case, but the thin sows did. And part of that, when we asked farms about their bump feeding management strategy, those farms that bump fed sows during the last part of gestation, particularly sows that were thin, those farms that used that management strategy had a lower pelvic organ prolapse rate than farms that did not bump feed or use that strategy. So we also identified and developed a perineal scoring system, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but that really helped us identify sows that were high risk of prolapse prior to going in and being loaded into the farrowing room so that we could collect biological samples to help better understand some of the events, biological events that are happening in those sows prior to farrowing. So that's kind of where that project was wrapping up. If you go to the National Pork Board's website, we just submitted about a 30-page final report on that, and you can go download that from the National Pork Board webpage, and or reach out to us, and we're happy to send you specific information on it as well. So as we continued developing that, right, we expanded the size of our team, the scope of our efforts on survivability and improving pig livability, and we're able to secure a larger funding in collaboration with the group at K-State and Purdue, and expanded our efforts into a lot of different areas. And so we'll continue to do some of the benchmarking, but this project will be much more focused on testing hypotheses and strategies to develop and disseminate into the industry. And the rationale for this large project is that 30 to 35% of the pigs that are born in the U.S. fail to reach the market. So they either die as a sow, they die during wean to finish, or they die during pre-wean mortality, and fail to recover the investment that was made into them, or some of the investment. And so as that continues to increase, the objective of this project was to really focus on different segments of the industry that are contributing to that 30 to 35%, so that we can have strategies and develop strategies and extension programs that will help provide producers and production systems the tools and knowledge and information that they need to help begin to mitigate and reduce that number. So the overall objective of that project is to identify causative factors that contribute to swine mortality, develop and disseminate strategies, and overall, that if using those strategies, we can effectively reduce overall mortality on a national scale by 1% per year of the project. So pretty aggressive goal, but needed to have a goal, right? So the specific objectives of that team, and again, I had a long list. There were 16 investigators on this project, 3 different universities, in addition to partnerships with external stakeholders as well. And so the first objective was to evaluate the management attitudes and economics associated with survivability in swine production, so we can start identifying the barriers to implementing specific strategies, as well as identifying the economic value of those strategies. The second objective was focused on mortality that happens on the U.S. sow farms, so sow farm mortality as well as pre-wean mortality. Objective 3 was focused on reducing wean to finish mortality, and Objective 4 was focused on an extension outreach and education resource strategy. So how do we get that information into the right hands? And then throughout all of these, we have a specific and we really placed a strong premium on the training of undergraduate students, graduate postdocs, and veterinary students to help prepare them in these areas to go out and join the industry as part of a strengthened talent and workforce at the end of this project. So I wanted to get into a few specifics and then also provide some progress on where we're at and some of the things we're doing, and drop some names. Some of the folks on this project are in here so that you guys know who to reach out to on if you have thoughts and perspectives on different areas. So Nick Gabler and Lee Schultz are a couple of the folks that are working on a specific Objective 1, which is really identifying the economic costs associated with mortalities across different swine production settings. Understand motivations, management motivations and barriers to implementing known and new production strategies that we know will result in improved survivability. And then facilitate benchmarking effectiveness so we can identify how successful specific strategies, once implemented, help reduce mortality in the industry. So that's really kind of the first objective, and really understanding the human side of mortality and what we can do that are driven by decisions that people make in the barns, and also the finances of those decisions. So the second objective is a pretty significant objective. There's a lot of folks on our team that are focusing in this area. Kara Stewart at Purdue, Jason Woodworth at K-State, Ken Stalder, myself, and several others that are executing on projects that are focused on understanding gilt selection and development to minimize sows that are dying due to lameness. Right? We recognize from our previous project that's a major issue, and we need to do a better job about finding sows and understanding how to find sows that can perform better longer. Research approach 2 was understanding the underlying causes of pelvic organ prolapse, so building on the work that we had already begun in the prior 12 months. And then the third approach was maximizing piglet survival by altering nutrition and management of both sows and piglets. The third objective is focused on the wean to finish pig. So this would involve like Mike Tokash at K-State, Chris Rademacher and Daniel Linares at Iowa State, and Nick Gabler are working on different components of this, and as well as Nick and Anna Johnson and Suzanne Millman are working on the transition piglet and projects designed around enabling a weaned pig's ability to thrive once it reaches the grow-finish site. And so some of you may have seen Jordan Gephardt's poster last night. He presented a poster on this literature review on the causes and contributors to mortality. And Jordan's a graduate student or a veterinary student working with Mike Tokash at Kansas State. So the other component is to develop data-driven predictors of mortality. This is Daniel Linares' work, and then also execute field-based research interventions to improve survivability. So a lot of people on the team are also involved with the extension and outreach efforts, but John Patience and Joel DeRucci are leading a major thrust in this area. And we have really two major objectives in this: to increase producer awareness of factors influencing swine livability, but also to ensure the rapid and effective implementation of this new information and technologies gets to the right producers in the right time that can implement that. So, a few projects. I'll get into a couple details of some of the projects that we're working on, so that so you can see where we're at with respect to them. I didn't have time to address all of the projects that we're working on, given the time constraints and the breadth of the topic that we're covering. But I want to talk about a few things specifically, just so you're aware of them. And if you recognize opportunities to build off of those, I would encourage you to reach out to the individual investigators that are leading these projects. So this is a project being led by Ken Stalder and Grace Muller at Iowa State University. And really one of the major objectives are to develop a evaluation tool that can be utilized on gilts during development at between 150 and 250 pounds. And so all of that data is being collected early in life that then retrospectively throughout the course of that animal's lifetime can be evaluated on the value of those metrics early in life as a predictor of their ability to leave the herd due to lameness or not due to lameness. And so that's been underway project. So Grace has tagged over 4,500 pigs. There's been a total of over 7,000 observations made. And so now there's kind of in the early analysis stage of that data and are continuing to enter on-farm data. So one problem with survivability project is that some of the animals are going to live for a long time. So it takes a little while to collect all this data, but so it's important that Grace jumped on it early in her program to get going on that. So one of the projects that Amanda Chipman, who's an extension program specialist, and Zoe Kiefer, who's a research associate at my group, that we've been leading with some producer collaborators, is refining our perineal scoring system in our attempt to better understand the biology of a sow that precedes prolapsing. And so we had a perineal scoring system of 1, 2, 3. 1s were low risk and 3s were high risk for pelvic organ prolapse. And we scored sows over a period of 7 weeks with the purpose of understanding how a sow's perineal score changes during late gestation. And so what you can see is at week 12 of gestation, about 85% of those would be still considered a perineal score of a 1 or presumed low risk of prolapse. And as they reach that week right before being loaded into the farrowing room, that number, only about 55% are what we would consider to be low risk based on their perineal score, or the bulging and the inflammation of the rectal and vaginal area. And 4%, we go from less than 1% up to 4%, so about a 400% increase in the number of sows that score a perineal score of 3. And those are important because those perineal scores of 3, 23% of those will subsequently prolapse in this study. Whereas 1% of the ones that we considered low risk subsequently prolapse. So even though 3s represent only 4% of the population, they represent almost 40% of the prolapses that happen on a sow farm. And so during that process, we collected a lot of biological samples during week 15. So we have blood samples and vaginal swabs from over 100 sows that had a high perineal score of 3, as well as parity-matched parity 1 sows that did not prolapse. And so now we can go back retrospectively and investigate what are some of the things that are happening in circulation. And what I can tell you now, just from doing a CBC analysis immediately, is that there's suppressed lymphocytes in circulation in sows that are high risk of prolapse compared to ones that are low risk. And our thought on that is that there's more immune cell infiltration into the reproductive tract of those sows prior to farrowing. And so we've also used those serum samples and measured a protein called C-reactive protein in sows that prolapsed compared to ones that did not, and they have significantly greater C-reactive protein in circulation prior to prolapsing compared to the ones that did not have a prolapse and were low risk. So another project that student Marcy Christensen is working on with Ken Stalder is understanding the genetic influence on a piglet's ability to thrive. That involves an examination of colostrum, IgG, IgA, and components within colostrum as they relate to genetic line and teat location. And so that project has been underway. Samples have been collected and are under analysis as well. And so really, the long-term goal of that is how do we continue to improve the number and quality of animals that make it to market by reducing pre-wean mortality. This is a project that's being led by Kara Stewart at Purdue, investigating farrowing induction strategies. One thing that we found out in that initial project, when you ask farms that are inducing sows, they're doing it, there's all kinds of variation happening across the industry. Okay, so there's farms that are inducing at day 114, and other farms that, and when you induce at day 114 now, that's almost 100% induction rate, right? Because gestation length has continued to increase. The average gestation length is much greater than 114. So, and then there's other farms that are inducing 10 to 15%, and then there's some farms that don't do any induction at all. And so understanding how different induction strategies can be utilized to promote the birth of healthy offspring is part of this project that Kara is leading at Purdue right now with a commercial collaborator as well. So Kia Gorley is a graduate student at K-State working with Jason Woodworth and Mike and Joel, and she led a project this summer that is investigating meal frequency. There's been some recent publications understanding that when a sow eats and how much a sow eats during farrowing may have an influence on stillbirth and farrowing duration. And so they've designed a very elegant study that was conducted in a commercial setting looking at feeding 6 pounds of lactation feed once daily as opposed to 1.5 pounds every 6 hours, or ad libitum feed intake when the sows were made to stand up every 6 hours. So there's a lot of data. I can say that a lot of data was collected on that project that's under analysis right now, and Kia will have a really strong project coming out of that, and with some really good results that you can anticipate. Jordan, as I mentioned already, getting on to AIM 3. So there's also, like I said, there's other projects that are happening and scheduled to begin in years 2, 3 of the grant with regard to Objective 2 and 3. This is just some of the projects that are happening. But Jordan has done an extensive literature review under the guidance of Mike Tokash at K-State, and really trying to better understand the factors that contribute to post-wean mortality. And so the other nice thing that if you saw Jordan's abstract or his poster, one of the other observations that he made is he collected a lot of information in these studies to help better understand experimental design when testing and conducting research trials to improve mortality with regard to how many animals, how many pins need to be on these studies, so that when an experiment is designed to reduce mortality or test strategy to reduce mortality, it can be properly designed. So if you're working in this area in a commercial venue, I would encourage you to reach out to Mike and Jordan on that, and maybe read his abstract as well that was published in this conference proceedings. Daniel Linares' work at Iowa State University is really focused on developing an automated framework that can predict mortality in specific flows of pigs. So in this strategy, he collected a tremendous amount of data from a breed-to-wean systems as well as closeout data from those growing pig groups that come from different sow flows. And then they collected just a tremendous amount of information on the health status of each of those sow farms, management factors, all kinds of inputs that could be generated to create an algorithm or an analysis that then could predict, based on those pieces of information, what the predicted mortality is going to be in a closeout. And so the model that they were able to create in their first attempt at this was that they could account for 82% of predicted mortality in the model based on the inputs they were collecting. Right? So now with Daniel's project, what the goal is to be able to help start quantifying the contribution of wean to finish mortality that's attributed to these different specific factors that are happening at sow farms. So as we can then stratify and quantify those inputs, then that'll help us drive change in particular areas where we know where they're going to be impactful on wean to finish growth. The other big part of this project is the internship program. So you saw a lot of trainees that were working at K-State, Purdue, and Iowa State that are definitely products in of themselves as part of this project. But we also are recruiting undergraduate students through an internship program. And this is the first one we tried that with Erica Johnson, and she was able to travel to multiple commercial systems, contributed to the research and data collection on 3 different projects at 3 different universities, and has really kind of refined and defined for herself that she wants to go into the swine industry and is looking at different graduate programs. So it's a great experience, and I would encourage you, if you guys know undergraduate students at your institutions that would like to be involved with this, that's one of the major outcomes, is to help develop talent for the industry. So the extension and outreach goals, a lot of this is being led, as I mentioned before, by Joel DeRushi and John Patience and several others. It's a large group activity. But we really want to focus on delivering information through high-impact conferences, dedicated development to be delivered and stored electronically. So we developed a web page just for this project, www.piglivability.org. where we post information and presentations on that website. Later years, there will be applied research and demonstration projects, and then also train the trainer activities as well. So this is the web page here. If you go to Improving Pig Survivability web page, you can log in there. One of the things that you'll find, or you don't have to log in, you just go to the web page, but one of the things that you can find is that Amanda Chipman and Kristen Olson have begun taking results from the Pelvic Organ Prolapse Project and creating short fact sheets or research-based documents that you can download off of that web page, and there's also 3 to 5 minute videos specifically explaining what was done, how the data was generated, and what our interpretation of that data is. So I know the problem with 40-minute presentations is that no one goes and looks at them, because I've posted many of them online and they don't get watched, but these 3-minute videos will get watched. So you can get more information on the perineal scores, the bump feeding strategies, water treatment systems, some of the observations that we've made. You can also go in, sign up, put your email address in, and when Amanda or Kristen upload new information, you'll get an email. And then the big thing that we're working on, one of the major extension activities that we expect to be impactful from this project is the International Conference on Pig Survivability. This is going to be in October 28th and 29th in 2020, so about 13 months from now. It'll be in Omaha, Nebraska. The intention is to bring in speakers from all over the place, right? We'll also be providing updates on the project, but the major objectives there are to give producers, continue to raise awareness, but also to give producers tools and capabilities to go back and make impact on the farm and in the production system to reduce mortality. So if you have thoughts, perspectives on that, that's another way. Don't hesitate to reach out to members of our team.